welcome everybody. If you are here for supporting and affirming transgender and gender expansive youth, you are in the right place. Thanks for joining us today. We're still letting some folks into the room, but we can go ahead and get started with introductions. Hope everybody's having a great day so far. I can get started with introductions. Would love everybody to introduce yourself in the chat as well. Our check-in question for today is, what is your summer vacation recommendation or your favorite spot to go during the summer? My name is Kendon Elliott. I use he, him, and they, them pronouns. I am a former employee, now a consultant at Youth Collaboratory. Youth Collaboratory operates the Runaway Homeless Youth Training and Technical Assistance Center. And for me, summer vacation spot, I love anywhere with water. So that can be lake or ocean. And so right now I would probably go somewhere north and cool, like Lake Michigan or somewhere like that. And I am here joined with my co-worker, Diamond, and I'll pass it to her to introduce herself.
Thanks, Kendon. Hello, everyone. I am Diamond Dumas. I use she, her, and they, them pronouns. I am a training and capacity building manager with Youth Collaboratory, and I am so excited to be here with you today. For me, my ideal summer destination is Cuba. I am an Afro-Latinx woman, and my family is rooted in Cuba, so that is my ideal summer destination.
And so we are excited to get to know you. If you're just hopping in, introduce yourself in the chat. There's going to be opportunities to talk as well, but we know we're going to have a pretty big group today. So we're going to start off with intros in the chats, and we'll do more thorough intros in breakout rooms a little later. So yeah, introduce yourself. What organization are you from? Your name, your pronouns, and a summer vacation spot that you enjoy. And we'll continue letting folks in as we move forward.
And later on, we will be joined by a special guest, Luca, who will be joining and contributing to this presentation as well. So all that being said, we'll go ahead and move into some space agreements. There are 8 key ones, but the main thing is that this works for us in the many spaces that we will be involved in today. So presentation, breakout rooms, debriefing sessions, and we want to make sure that these agreements exist so that there's mutual understanding and respect as we potentially learn new things, challenge some ideologies, and ultimately work to be better at supporting and affirming gender expansive youth, as well as the whole LGBTQ plus community. So right now we have be present, uphold confidentiality, use strength-based language, take space and make space, question and encourage sharing, recognize comfort versus safety, which is a key one. Sharing, learning, and sharing accountability, as well as taking care of yourself and the community that you exist in. We are, of course, open to this collaborative space, and if anyone has any additions, feel free to put them in the chat so that way we can acknowledge them as a whole and use them to better our interactions with one another today. And as I wait for some potential other recommendations to come in, we want to let you all know that you've probably already seen the notification that this is being recorded for future use. And we also encourage you to be on cameras, be engaged in the chat or with your voice, so that way this space is a space of learning, engagement, and opportunity for all of us.
And that said, just to add to what Diamond's saying too, breakout rooms will not be recorded. Those will not be at all recorded. So those spaces are, sort of private chat time, but we are hoping, and I think a lot of organizations are hoping that we can share with folks who weren't able to be here today. So we are hoping to record the main session. So we're excited to join. Does anyone have any other sort of things that you need out of this space? Any additions at all? All right. If something comes up, again, take care of yourself, take care of others. And we are, in a space of learning, and no questions are bad questions. As far as agenda today, what you can expect from us is, we did some welcoming. We're going to do an overview of some of the definitions and laws and policies and things like that in terms of what's required. And then we're going to share as well as just some background information about trans and gender expansive youth. And then you all are going to have an opportunity to practice some things, to talk amongst one another in breakout rooms, and to share. We'll take a break after that. We'll come back together first, chat a little bit, and then we'll take a break. And then have some more discussion and talk strategies and tips and resources and things like that. And then, as Diamond mentioned, we have a special guest, Luca Kai, the executive director from the St. Louis Queer Support Helpline, who's going to join for a little bit and share some more information about that as a resource for you all. And then we'll kind of close out. So hoping that, get yourself situated. We're going to be here in community for a while. Get a snack, get some water, whatever you need to do. We know that this, virtual space can be hard at times, but we really hope to create, a welcoming space that everyone feels good at participating. Also, feel free, we love emojis. So if you want to send a heart or, slow down or any of that, we welcome that as well. And we're going to move forward. So I'm going to hand it over to Diamond.
Thanks, Kendon. So we are coming and entering into the space with the thought that folks here have a basic understanding of the LGBTQ knowledge, training, and understanding of the community. So in this regard, this will not be a one-on-one training. It's meant to advance your skills that you already have in the area. But that being said, just to do a very basic level setting, we have 4 key definitions, being transgender or trans as the umbrella term, cisgender, gender expansive, or queer. Some things to note: if you think about words differently, trans meaning across. So as an example, males that are transitioning into females, or females that are transitioning into males, but the term gender expansive also including folks that are non-binary or trans-masculine or trans-feminine, and also making space in these definitions for cultural terms such as two-spirit that would also fall underneath the umbrella. And a key thing to note is that when talking about being trans or transness, is that trans gender identity do not imply any specific sexual identity or orientation. So therefore, trans people may also identify as straight, gay, lesbian, bisexual, etc. And on the opposite end of thinking about trans meaning across lines, cis meaning on the same side. So a cisgendered person would align with their assigned birth, gender, and sexuality. Feel free to move ahead. There will be, the slides will be shared at the end, so there's an extra list of glossary terms for those of you who would like to check those out later on as well. Next slide, please. Perfect.
Sorry, everybody. It was going too fast.
Perfect. So Kendon's going to take this piece where we just delve in a little bit about some preconceived notions or ideologies that we have and where those may have come from.
Yeah. So I'll share a little bit about myself because I think that it leads into this next part. So I live in St. Louis. Diamond is here from Florida, who, you know, that state and where Diamond lives has its own culture. And we know that St. Louis has its own unique culture and the ways that that trans people are viewed and treated and things like that, just like every community does. And that's not monolithic, right? That varies across a lot of different things. But you know, myself as a trans person growing up in the Midwest, also as a person who has worked in direct service with young people experiencing homelessness, like I'm pretty attuned to the messages and the things that people often receive. And so all of us receive a lot of messages as we're coming, you know, growing up about a lot of things, right? And you're rewarded and punished depending on what that is. And so that might be, you know, about, you know, what you're supposed to do in terms of saying please and thank you, or that might be things around how you're supposed to behave in terms of your gender, in your presentation, and your behavior. And trans people are often, right, and young people growing up are often policed in terms of how they're supposed to act in terms of their gender presentation. So we get messages from everywhere. We get messages from the media. We get messages from teachers and schools and mentors and caregivers and friends and all of the different things. So we're going to ask for you all to take a moment and think about some of the messages that you received about trans and gender expansive people. So just take about 20 seconds and think about as you were growing up, maybe at different ages, from think about kindergarten all the way up high school and beyond. And what were some of the messages that you received about trans people? And so we're going to ask for a couple of polls that are anonymous about some of those messages that you received, because I think that regardless of how we act as a result of that, these messages do shape us in some way or another. So there, thank you, Benita, for putting up a poll. So we've got a few questions here. Take a moment. And what were the most frequent messages that you received about trans or gender expansive people growing up? And so, and I mean, most frequent. So what were the things that, you know, you were hearing in most of the spaces you were in? And so we invite you to take a moment with those questions, and then we'll show the results. Give it just a few more seconds for those who haven't had a chance to vote yet. Okay, I'm going to share these results. So if we look at just across all of our different experiences, and a lot of this depends on how you were raised, where you were raised, right? The generation you grew up in, a lot of that too. But the most frequent messages were either like a negative message that trans people are bad, evil, sinful, etc., or receiving some types of mixed messages, like maybe from some people that looked a certain way and from some people that looked a different way. Not a lot of just primarily positive messages. And then frequent messages you received about trans and gender expansive people related to mental illness. So a lot around being confused or mentally ill. And some folks, a few of you said you received some mixed messages about that. And then safety. So in how do we think about trans people and safety? So a lot of you, some folks received some messages that trans people are safe. And some people, a lot, receive messages that they are unsafe, and quite a few of you received some mixed messages. Thanks for sharing your experience. Curious if there is anyone who would want to say more, either in the chat or unmute about that, or And I think my main question is like, how did those messages impact you? Not as much of details of your upbringing, but what's the impact of these type of messages on us as people and as children and as young people?
I think,
Hello.
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm Jennifer.
Hi, Jennifer. Go ahead.
I'm 61, so I've gotten so many messages over the years. It's not funny. When I was younger, up till I was about 20, I got almost no messages about this at all. It almost didn't exist. Okay, you had the drag queens, which weren't really gay. They just like to dress up like, like women. And so my mixed messages were kind of odd growing up. But then after I hit 20, then people started coming out and people started really making a lot of noise, and the messages changed. Just because of my nature, I went to the positive messages because that's the people I dealt with, and the negative ones I threw away.
Thanks for sharing that, Jennifer. So it sounds like, yeah, quite a wave of things in different spaces or different times of your life. And yeah, thanks. Cole, were you going to say something as well?
Yeah, I was just gonna say it's interesting how like growing up, cisgendered in just a community, very rural, small town, bubble is what I'm trying to depict here. How like without exposure, there is this like phenomenon of just like I don't even know if assuming is the right word, but just like believing like a certain thing that you are like told or that was created without even like questioning it, having no reason to question it until you get to a certain point where maybe you're exposed to something other. And I think for a lot of people, they don't. And so basically whatever the society norm is within their small community doesn't even get questioned or challenged. And I'm always taken aback when I watch shows that are from as late as the early 2000s to beyond, 90s, what have you, just like how pervasive, I guess like cisgender being homophobia specifically running through like our media, so shows and stuff like that, and just how like so pervasive it is for just like little comments. Basically, if you watch shows from 2000s beyond and now the 2022, there's just so many problematic comments that were just like casual conversations. And I think it's just representative of I guess like the times in society and just like people not even really questioning messages that they've been told and just like society's almost indoctrination really. Anyways, sorry, I feel like I started rambling there, but that was kind of like the first thing that came to mind when you asked the question.
Yeah, thanks for that. Go ahead, Diamond.
Perfect. I was actually going to say that's a really good segue into some of the data points that we have to share, because often what media shows us or shares with us is sometimes aligned and oftentimes not aligned with what the data shows. So we know that LGBTQ youth and the community as a whole experience high levels of adversity and challenges. You can see in the diagram just a list of some of the main ones and the rates of comparison between non-LGBTQ folks. But just wanting to highlight that like LGBTQ plus youth experience homelessness at a significantly disproportionate rate than their cisgender heterosexual peers. And then we even know that that is compounded upon by race and ethnicity. So Black LGBTQ youth in particular, again, Black trans youth are, again, disproportionately impacted by homelessness and other adversities while experiencing that homelessness.
Simon's friends are taking over the microphone. I love that. Yeah, and LGBTQ youth, just for one of the data points, even thinking, had over twice the rate of early death around, than young people, other young people who are on the street. And so when we think about prevention, when you're thinking about LGBTQ youth overall, and particularly trans youth, like that prevention is so essential because it is not safe on the street, like next level not safe, and just the levels of trauma and adversity are much higher. And Diamond, how is it now?
It's better now. So fun fact about me, which is, I guess, no longer a secret. I am an avid dog mom. So pardon my babies in the background. They get excited when we talk about like advancing the movement and supporting LGBTQ youth. And then just another piece to add to the previous slide is that, again, some of the messages that we received is that like LGBTQ youth come out and then suddenly like they're forced out of their homes and kicked out, and all of these things happen instantaneously. But there is research and data that shows that this is more of like a strain, tension, like progressive thing that forces LGBTQ youth out of their homes, instead of just like this one instantaneous moment. So while that is possible and does is an experience of some folks, more research has shown that it's more of a tension that ultimately leads to the outcome of LGBTQ plus youth experiencing homelessness. But moving on to transgender youth health and safety. So this is a large study which, like most of the studies, show that folks that identify as transgender or are part of the LGBTQ plus community are, again, at disproportionate rates of depression and suicidality, as well as victimization. And so we know some of these data points are a little bit past dated, but this particular one is significant from 2017 because it is the largest ever federally supported capture of transgender youth data. So it surveyed over 118,803 high school in 10 states, being Colorado, Delaware, Hawaii, Massachusetts, Maryland, Maine, Michigan, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Wisconsin, kind of sounding like the song there. But the Trevor Project has also done some more recent data that captures the impact of COVID as well as attack on transgender folks from like legislative communities, and as well as court battles, media, and then public disclosure. So in that Trevor Project data, they did a study or a survey of 820 LGBTQ youth aging from 13 to 24, with 70% of them saying that they listen to and take in these recent news and issues, and that impacts 2/3 of the LGBTQ community. Again, we'll be sharing all these links out, so you'll receive all this data and can further look into it more. And as Kendra mentioned, I am not from St. Louis, but locally in St. Louis, there are at least 2/3 of the trans community that indicate that they have not had their mental health needs fully met. So that's something that is specific to you, that shows a disproportionateness for receiving healthcare for mental health for trans youth than to their heterosexual peers and non-trans peers as well. So thank you for moving on, because that just says like, okay, well, we know all this stuff exists and the data supports it. So what are some of the needs of trans youth experiencing homelessness? And of course, the number one at 28% is housing, closely followed by transition-related supports. So this study was done by True Colors, and housing was most frequently listed, along with transition-related supports following after, but then other supports like healthcare, employment, and education were also identified, but not, but those first two are almost double some of the other ones. So we'll move on to a point of reflection based off of some of the things you've heard here today. So again, feel free to unmute or share in the chat, but how does the national data compare to the experiences of trans/gender expansive youth in your St. Louis community? And then a follow-up or additional question would be, why is this information significant in how we serve gender expansive youth?
And feel free to drop your thoughts in the chat or unmute if you want to. One thing that comes to mind for me, Diamond, as you say that, is some of the mental health data that you showed that is national data. I think that some of the impact of the state legislative things that are happening in Missouri and the policies and laws and things particularly. We've heard, I volunteer for Squish, the St. Louis Queer Support Helpline as well. And there's definitely a lot of callers that have been calling in, and the call data from that. And Luca will talk about that later, but locally, the mental health impact of some of that has really been a stressor.
Thanks for sharing that, Kendon. And I see Mary has also shared that from their experiences, the data reflects the experiences of the youth that they've been supporting, and in particular, youth who identify trans or gender expansive having a hard time accessing mental health resources because of their identity. And a consequence of that being that young people are moving away out of Missouri. And there are similar laws, if not the exact same laws, in Florida that are, to your point, limiting access, preventing access, and people are moving away for fear of threat of their rights. So thank you for sharing that, Mary and Kendon. Any more last minute additions before we move on? All right, thank you.
Yeah, so we're going to go, and I wanted to spend just a few minutes talking about program requirements. So most of you all in the room, if not everybody, is either probably funded through the COC, the Continuum of Care, ultimately through federal dollars that are HUD, or through the Federal Youth Service Bureau, so FYSB, dollars that fund all of the RHY grant, the Runaway Homeless Youth grants, so Basic Center, Transitional Living, Street Outreach, and Maternity Group Home. And so some of these requirements are directly from, or all of them are directly from law and policy on a federal level that local communities have to follow in order to seek or continue getting funded under either of those sources. So I want to share a few of those so that you all are, regardless of your role, familiar with sort of what are the requirements for these grants and for programs that are serving these grants, and what requirements are sort of developed by my program versus what are like federal law. So we'll take a couple minutes and share some of that now. So the first one is the Runaway Homeless Youth Final Rule, the RHY Final Rule, which covers, as I mentioned, TLP, Street Outreach, Basic Center, shelter programs, and Maternity Group Home. So I'll highlight a few things here, and you all have access to the entire thing. But the main thing that you need to know is that staff the service delivery and staff training, everyone is required to be prepared to comprehensively address the strengths and needs of all youth, including supporting the strengths and needs of young people related to their gender and gender identity. It also says in the statute that best practices in that area are asking young people, trans and questioning intersex clients, to identify their gender, to have them self-identify, and then to house them based on that gender identification. A couple other things: no youth are able to be excluded from participation. So that's kind of a general, broad non-discrimination policy, and sex and gender identity and sexual orientation are all included in that, along with other things: race, ethnicity, age, religion, socioeconomic status, physical, cognitive ability, language, beliefs, values, behavior patterns, or customs. So it is a very broad non-discrimination settlement that that you should keep in mind in thinking about all young people, but that does include gender identity, sexual orientation, and sex. Eligibility for a program can include the assessment of needs on all the applicants in terms of health and safety of them, the safety of other beneficiaries, things like that. And also that federally, youth may not be subjected to any medical treatment, psychiatric treatment, psychosocial, which is like groups and things like that, life skills, any kind of treatment without their consent. And so it does require their consent. Those cannot be forced within the program or required. The other pieces that are important for note is that any treatment, like what would be called like reparative therapy, sometimes you'll hear it called, but trying to change someone's sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression is prohibited if you receive any of these grants. And so that cannot be a part of your program or provided, as well as thinking about confidentiality. So a youth's confidential information can't be disclosed except when it has, written informed consent of the youth and the parent and guardian consent if they're under 18. And that includes things like sexual orientation, gender identity, sex, things like that. Gender identity is something that's considered like public health information, and so as well as sexual orientation. So really think of it in that way, that we can't go around disclosing someone's HIV status, or that someone else has some other mental health disorder. We also can't go around sort of disclosing people's sex assigned at birth or their gender identity. That is really up to us to serve them right in alignment with that, but they are able to be out or not out to the degree that they are comfortable. In terms of and please, I'm gonna roll through this because this is a small component, but if you have any questions, drop those in the chat. Happy to take those and support any way that I can. In terms of HUD, so continuum of care, if you are funded and connected to the continuum of care, HUD is the federal office that funds all of those grants. And so HUD has an equal access rule that requires access to HUD programs without regard to a person's actual or perceived sexual orientation, gender identity, or marital status. There are 3 different components of this rule. The very last one, or the third one, is the one that really most applies to youth homelessness programs. Some of these other ones are more like home buying and things like that. So we're going to focus on the third one for just a moment, which would apply more to your program. So in this component of the rule, this rule ensures that all individuals have equal access to the core programs, including shelters, transitional housing, permanent supportive housing, right? Any of those programs, in accordance with their gender identity, in a manner that affords equal access to the individual's family. So again, just equal access, that they can't be discriminated against. And then the programs, benefits, services, et cetera, must be in accordance to their gender identity without subjected to intrusive questioning or asked to provide documentation. This was a really important addition to the rule because there were some, concerns before, and a lot of trans people, their ID might not match their gender identity, or the birth certificate might be different than your ID, than your social security card, because all of those are time and money and requirements and hoops to jump through. And so that was a really important distinction, that, not requiring documentation in order to prove sort of your gender in a specific way. So any questions about any of the rules and the policies and things like that? We wanted to make sure and just kind of give that background so that you all have all of that in one place as it might be needed. Okay, well, we get to go to the fun part then, because now we get to talk about actually like serving trans and gender expansive youth and what you all are doing and what you would do in some scenarios and things like that. So Diamond, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Of course, thanks, Kendon. So what we've done is establish 2 scenarios for you with trans or gender expansive youth, and we'll be dropping those demonstrations into the chat, but you'll read the brief bio of the young person that you've been given and determine and discuss how you want to engage and support them in receiving services. So things that you would consider is the first engagement, screening and intake, service delivery, and what aftercare would look like. And we do have a video. And just a note for the video, it uses male, female, etc. language to describe gender and best practices. It's best to use like male, female, intersex, etc. language to describe sex, and then man, woman, non-binary, etc. to describe gender. So just always maintaining the difference between sex and gender.
Diamond, do you want me to go back to the video first?
Yeah, if you feel like we have enough time.
Sure. Yeah, and I think mainly as we go into these scenarios, just thinking about how do we mirror the language that young people use to describe themselves. And sometimes, that might be uncomfortable or different for us, for a lot of reasons, but thinking about how do you use the pronouns that they describe, and that might be an adjustment or a cultural or language adjustment for you personally, right? But what's a little hard or challenging or different for you, makes a difference in someone else's like well-being. And so really understanding that tension and pushing ourselves to lean into that. Diamond, anything else you wanted to share on this slide before I jump in with the video?
Just some common best practices, which of course you've hit on, but just avoiding pronoun assumptions, using gender neutral pronouns such as they, them, or ze, them. There are additional things like neopronouns that we can get into later on if there's time, but just finding a way to examine your own biases and then actively working to disrupt them. And then, of course, a key solid way to navigate that space is just mirroring the language that the young person uses to identify them as.
All right, folks, here we go. A romaine and kale salad with avocado, cucumber, shishito peppers, and 4 kinds of cheese. Sprinkled in balsamic straight from Italy.
Wow! In my day, salads only had 2 ingredients. A rock-hard wedge of iceberg lettuce and a stinky old dried-up tomato.
Sorry, guys. I'm gonna have to eat fast. Alex is stopping by in a few minutes to work on our robotics project.
Alex, is that the girl with that weird dog? Or the boy with the hat with the wings that flap?
No, Uncle Jay. This is Alex.
Oh, okay, I remember. A very nice young, come to think of it, well, is Alex a boy or a girl?
Actually, Alex doesn't define themselves as boy or girl.
What else is there?
Back in your day, most people understood the world in terms of just boys and girls. But now, we know gender is more complex than that.
Wait, aren't we just talking about whether you're born with a or a hee?
When you're born, your sex is assigned in a medical way, but the sex listed on your birth certificate may not necessarily match your gender identity.
Gender identity is a person's inner experience of who they are in terms of gender, their deep personal sense of being male, female, a blend of both, or neither.
And while many people have a gender identity that's the same as their assigned birth sex of female or male, that's not always the case, because gender exists on a spectrum. Like transgender, which means a person whose gender identity is not consistent with their assigned birth sex. Non-binary, which means a person whose identity doesn't fall in the category of either male or female. And genderqueer or gender fluid, which means a person who does not identify themselves as having a specific gender at all.
Does gender identity have to do with being straight or gay?
Actually, no. Gender identity has to do with the way you feel about yourself, while sexual orientation is based on the way you feel toward others, the people you may or may not be attracted to.
You know, I really like Alex, and I can tell they're a good friend to you. But I'm still pretty confused about all of this.
That's okay. You don't have to fully understand someone to respect them. To start, try not to make any assumptions about a person's gender, and use the name and pronouns that they ask you to. Above all, be a friend or ally for people of all gender identities.
That's right, Mom. Oh, Alex is here. Come on in.
Hey, everyone.
Oh, hey, Alex. Care for some salad? The balsamic's right from Italy, you know.
Thanks for sharing that, Kendon. And I think that sets us up great to think about these things as we approach our breakout session. So again, we'll be given one of two scenarios of a young person. Figure out amongst yourselves as a group how you feel that you should best serve them. And again, some of the things to consider are first engagement, assessment and intake, service delivery, and aftercare. And when thinking about service delivery, hitting those 4 key things of like safety and support, policies and procedures, cultural responsiveness, as well as gender responsiveness, and then of course the physical environment.
Welcome back, everybody. Okay, I hope that you were able to have some good conversation with your groups, and we look forward to diving in and talking about this a little bit more. Thanks so much for everybody who participated, and I hope that you were able to share and like learn from one another. So as we talk about these scenarios, we want to kind of look at this flow of services and thinking about what that first engagement looks like. What does screening and intake, what are things you would need to consider in that process, as well as service delivery. So in the thick of it, right in the middle of that, what policies and procedures come into play? How do you make it safe and supportive? How are you being culturally and gender responsive? And what does that physical environment look like? And then, of course, thinking about how you move that into aftercare and the things young people might need after they leave your program. So let's dive right into the first scenario. I'd love to hear from you all a little bit. Diamond, are you here? Did you get kicked out?
No,
Okay, I lost your face for a second, so I'm going to hand it to you.
Of course. So groups 1 and 2 had Axel. So Axel uses they, them pronouns, is a 16-year-old Black non-binary person. They came out to their parents about a month ago, and the relationship has been strained since then. So recent arguments about the clothing that they wear, and there was an altercation where their mom threw out their clothing onto the front lawn. But since then, Axel has been bouncing around, sleeping on couches at their friend's house for a month, and is just trying to consistently attend school, but has been struggling to find a job. They are looking for a more permanent place to live that is, of course, LGBTQ plus affirming and can assist with any mental health resources for their mood disorder. So for groups 1 and 2, what were some of the needs that you identified that needed to be prioritized to best assist Axel? Feel free to come off mute on camera or drop any comments that you have in the chat. And I was in some of these breakouts, so I've heard some things.
I mean, I think I was in group 1, but I know we noticed that Axel was in need of like secure housing. We wanted to make sure that they felt safe within the environment they were in, maybe get a better understanding of what are their existing support systems and like where both parents are with regard to Axel coming out, and trying maybe to find ways to engage the whole family system within a conversation so Axel doesn't have to feel as isolated in this process. I'm sure I'm forgetting a lot of the other things that were said.
Oh, thank you for that, Anamita. Anybody else want to unmute and share something, or feel free to drop things in the chat as well. What were any other specific needs that you noted for Axel?
I mean, in regards to like, I guess the clothes, so maybe just like some basic needs of like clothing, in addition to like housing. Obviously at some point down the road, maybe looking into connecting to, resources to kind of help with mental health, and kind of figuring out like the schooling situation.
Thanks for that, Sarah. I'm curious if anyone talked about any cultural resources that might be available for Axel.
My group discussed maybe trying to look into LGBTQ plus support group for Axel, maybe to have people around them that experience some similar situations would be more comfortable for them, since this is fairly new to them. They probably haven't had the opportunity to discuss this with many like-minded people.
Thank you for that, Sladen. Any additional resources focused around Axel's race, in addition to their identity as a non-binary person?
Yeah, I didn't even look.
I'm sorry, I missed that. Who was speaking? Sorry.
There are a lot of awesome, resources and things that exist that are culturally responsive in St. Louis, and that are, Black queer focused too. So I think that there's an opportunity to get Axel connected to community in a way that, we're folks who understand that intersectionality of experiences. But curious if anybody on like in the room, if you all have partnerships with specific organizations that you think would be like a good connect point for Axel within the community.
I would say MTUG probably, with the support groups that they offer. And I believe they also have a specific, I think they do. Definitely know that there is a like masculine like support group that perhaps Axel could go to, or no, not binary, but there could also be like race as part of that too. But I would maybe start there, like with folks who are starting with those support groups and then branch out to try and plug in that way.
Yeah, thanks, Krista. I think that would be an excellent like place to start with MTUG. And they do have an QT-POC group that's like queer and trans people of color. I think it starts at 18, but they'd be a great connect point, right, for some other things that exist. Thanks for sharing that.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think at one point, maybe prior to COVID, I think Epworth maybe was doing something with LGBTQ, like having some sort of group or support that we had.
Yes, Epworth has a LGBT support group monthly.
Thanks for sharing that, Sarah Mary. Great. What other, thinking about Axel's, like kind of the dynamics with like family and things like that in this situation, what other strategies might you use? Any thoughts about that? You know, what you say and do sort of when Axel comes through your door?
I guess one
I
thing
mean,
that's
the most, oh, go for it.
sorry. Sorry, I was gonna say one thing that comes to mind is to like when speaking with Axel to think about safety from their perception of safety and not necessarily what we think. I think sometimes like as a social worker myself, like it can be like, well, let's talk to a parent or let's reunify, but with working with youth, sometimes it's just not safe. And so just listening to them in that moment and then like building that rapport out to get to a point where you can talk more about the family dynamic and how they would like to proceed, or if it's kind of a, maybe they want to find a chosen family and kind of explore those community supports instead.
Yeah, thanks for that, Clarissa. I appreciate you bringing that into the space and really taking the leadership of the young person that way and like hearing them and what they feel like they need. Cool. Someone else was about to talk to, I don't know who that was.
Yeah, I was just going to say that trying to establish trust and rapport, making sure that during that first interaction, you know, you make Axel feel as if they can really be heard and like truly listen and engage them in the planning process of like, what kind of supports do they think they need? Like, what does Axel feel like Axel needs to be at a better place? So just building that trust and rapport, which was already said.
Yeah. How would you house Axel at your organization? Like, what does that look like for a non-binary youth in like your specific setting? I don't know if anybody would be open to sharing or how you would, you know, do you have spaces that are gender neutral? Do you have single bedrooms? Is it something you would have to figure out or through conversation with Axel? Like sort of, how does that look in your specific space, if anybody's open to sharing?
For Epworth's shelter, they ask the youth, they have a female side and a male side, but most of the rooms are singles. Not all of them, but most of them are singles. So they ask the youth which side they would be more comfortable being in. And that's the side that they go into. And I know at least for the female side, they're all single rooms. For the males, I think there are a couple of doubled ups, but they go based on what the youth states that the side that they're more comfortable on.
Okay, thanks for that. I'm seeing the same from Moira in the chat as well. Thank you for that. Okay. In the interest of time, I'm gonna shift to the second scenario. Thanks everybody for sharing from the first group. I want to make sure we have time for folks in Sam's group, to share as well. So if you were in group scenario 2, what were some of the needs that you identified for Sam right off the bat?
So right off the bat, we discussed assessing for safety and then housing, just having some stable housing kind of hierarchy of needs as the starting point.
Yeah, thanks for that, Cole. What other things came up in your conversations?
A support group, since it says that they don't know anyone.
Yeah, so really getting connected with some community here in St. Louis and some supports. Thanks for that. What other things?
I had mentioned to the people in my group that this is basically a carbon copy of one of my clients. So, and Cole had mentioned the, kind of that Maslow's hierarchy of needs to, to establish that baseline. And so for my client, we got shelter figured out, shelter, reliable shelter, food, all that, the good stuff, and kind of building off of that. And so, establishing a primary care doctor, and, getting tea safely, and then, looking for employment, things like that. But then discussing if he would be open to, things such as therapy, and starting to maybe address things that have happened, because obviously he's been through some severe trauma, but again, not doing anything on his behalf without, talking to him, getting his buy-in. But, clearly we need to build from the ground up and get him to a stable place. But yeah, I think the biggest things he's already identified. So starting with those and then getting to the more intricate things once we have all those baseline needs met.
Thanks for that, Lauren. I appreciate you bringing in the medical care, because we think about basic needs and we think about housing and food and shelter, and, understanding that medical care is an essential part of like health and well-being. And even though transition related care may not feel as critical, it really can be like a life and death situation for folks. So thanks for bringing that in.
What healthcare system or agencies would you all recommend Sam for to receive gender affirming supportive healthcare in the St. Louis area? Like, are there certain clinics or doctors that are known for that sort of work?
Yeah, thanks for that, Marissa. So go ahead, Diamond.
I was just going to acknowledge the spot from Barissa's chat. Any other examples or spaces?
Wash U. And if they're, I know my 18-year-olds can go to children's. And then if they have parental buy-in, obviously they can also go to children's. And then Planned Parenthood as well. For now, unfortunately.
Yeah, WashU has the gender clinic that a lot of folks that will serve minors as well as, young adults. Anywhere else that you all recommend? just in the interest of sharing resources in the space. I will say, just from my time, like doing direct service, that it is really helpful sometimes to build relationships with specific, even specific doctors at mainstream clinics. You know, I know there used to be like a doctor at People's who was like really, really great and trans affirming, and just knowing who that person was and stuff was really helpful, because you can direct clients to who may have Medicaid and have limited options and stuff like that. So it's helpful just to get connected to the community, and Luca will be here and be able to share that Squish is a great resource to be able to, if you were stuck with like, where do I send this young person? Squish is a great resource to have a hub of who's doing what, where, and when for support. So I think anything else, Diamond, that you wanted to pull forward in this one?
I think we're good to transition.
Great. Thanks everybody for everything that you shared. And we're gonna take about a 10-minute break. Give you all a minute, stretch, refill your drink, whatever you need to do, move around. Let's come back at, should we come back at 1? Let's come back at 1 o'clock. So take a few minutes, come back promptly at 1. We're gonna start right away, and we will see you in a few minutes. Welcome back, everybody. If you are just hopping on, excited to have you back. Give folks a second to get situated in the space. Hope you enjoyed your break. And we are gonna dive back in. And Luca, our guest, should be joining us in just a moment, so we'll hand it over to them once they join. But we wanted to start off, you know, we talked a lot about some of the challenges and the needs that, you know, trans young people are experiencing. And I wanted to share this Bridge to Thriving framework. And it was developed by Kia Darlene Hammond, who actually was a professor at SLU. And it's very research-based and very focused on Black, queer, and questioning same gender loving young adults. And in her research, she has really dove into what are the things that help young people, particularly those young people, thrive. And so we wanted to share this in just thinking about beyond just survival mode, which a lot of young people that we serve are in survival mode, but like, how do we move past that and really help young people develop that whole sense of like identity and hope and all of the things that they need to really thrive. And I was curious if, you know, and I know, thank you, like Epworth, you mentioned like the support group that you have, and that's like a good example of like, how do we develop community? But curious if there are other areas or things within your programs that you're doing that really focuses on building thriving for young people, and particularly trans and gender expansive young people. And wonder if anybody would be open to sharing things that you might be doing in that space. And maybe this is something new to consider. But even things like, you know, art and music, and bringing in, you know, opportunities to think about things outside of survival, and like moving into the abundance and the resources that someone has within, as well as what they have in their family and their chosen family, in their sense of belonging with others. So you all have this in your slide, but more than anything, I wanted to show it just as like a point, a pivot point, or an area to really think about when we think about serving young people, and particularly trans and gender expansive young people. So Diamond and I are going to share, just kind of reflect on a few of the tips and strategies that you all mentioned earlier, and as well as some that maybe weren't shared yet. So Diamond, I'm going to hand it to you for a quick second. I'm trying to get Luca in on the call.
Sounds great. Thank you, Kendon. So some of the things we've touched on throughout the presentation, and may have even been mentioned by you all in your breakout groups, but some key things that we wanted to bring up is like following the young person's lead. So when talking about mirroring language that was discussed previously in the language is powerful section, like we want to make sure that we are creating a space that is safe for young people to, one, be their true authentic selves and self-identify, and that is from their gender, their name, their pronouns, and everything that we can, and keep that information confidential, as Kendon was mentioning previously. And some other things to ensure that those same aspects or elements of their identity are being reflected in intake forms and policies and procedures, as well as like their physical environment. So in particular, intake forms and note-taking, case management, right? We want to be ensuring that how the young person is presenting themselves is reflected in their information. Yes, there is a need for like names assigned at birth on some documentation, but in all other cases where the space is given and case notes and
on the board, like the whiteboard, if you have people's names listed, or yeah, things like that.
Right. And spaces like that where there is opportunity and freedom within the organization to create that space for that young person, like those opportunities should be taken and utilized to be effective. And then when the need for like names assigned at birth are necessarily like clearly identifying like this is only because of this circumstance and these are this person's like chosen name. But in terms of policies and procedures and physical environments, like offering young people choice and in the smallest things, such as like the hygiene products that they use, the hair care products that they use, the items of clothing that they get to choose and feel comfortable in. And making sure that those are inclusive. So as an example, a gendered closet is not beneficial to someone experiencing like discovering their gender expansiveness and gender identity, like providing options and making a space that is suitable for everyone instead of spaces that are suitable for one identity or another, and therefore putting the burden on someone that is trans or gender expansive to say or come to you and say like this closet doesn't work for me, removing that barrier or challenge and just simply making an overall inclusive space. And that just goes into being intentional about connecting with LGBTQ youth as well as support, whether those be formal MOUs or informal supports and resources in the community. Like you want to have the ability to say, you know what, like, let me call my friend at the spot and see what we can do about getting you gender affirming care. Let me call my friend at Upworth about having you join their support group. And that shows that the intentionality of you and your organization goes beyond just this one person in this one moment, that you are actively putting in the work to create a safe and inclusive environment. Kendon, any thoughts on anything I said so far?
No, that's amazing. Go ahead.
Yeah, some other things. Just only asking questions that are necessary or needed for this young person's care. So, and this helps to avoid accidentally outing young people, and gives them to the space to self-disclose not only to you, but also to others that they may be developing relationships with while in community with shelters or other organizations. When we talk about safety, considering physical, mental, emotional safety as a part of the overall living environment and space, what else?
I think even things like, as we consider, I've been in programs or seen programs where, rec, like what are the rec opportunities that we're offering? And are we splitting people just like by gender, or, making that a very like, okay, all the girls are going to get their nails done today and all the boys are going to watch football or something, like sometimes folks who aren't gender expansive or aren't trans, like may not, like just the way that we're socialized, we may not think about those things, but those things really matter. And they send a message to youth who are like, okay, like, I don't know where I fit here. Or even if I do identify as a girl, I don't want to get my nails done. Or like, because of the fluidity that is gender. So just considering those types of things. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that goes into the second bullet point, which is like including youth in the design of services and things that are offered. So that way their input is matched and is reflected in the services that are provided from rec to like non-binary rooms or bathrooms or anything of that nature. Perfect. We also know that this list is not like all encompassing, and if anyone has any tips or strategies from their work that they've seen that has been effective and would be beneficial to the group, like feel free to put that in the chat or come off and tell us some things that you've seen that have been working at your organizations.
Anybody have anything to add right now? All right.
Oh, Lauren said, take it away.
No, I was just, co-sign on Lauren. Lauren, thank you for that. Be able to support trans and gender nonconforming staff as well. Yeah, and thinking about, how are we giving space for staff to self-identify and get their needs met, and being inclusive, and thinking about like, how are we supporting those connections, right? Because there's not a lot of trans and gender expansive adults that are in, positions where they are in a mentoring role, or where that is even like a safe thing and not a thing of like, oh, you're trying to indoctrinate, youth or kids and, that type of thing. So like, how can you position folks who identify in that way as like mentoring relationships informally, even with young people? Yeah, thank you for that, Lauren. Any specific tips or strategies that you feel like would be important to put in the space, Lauren, or anyone else, about supporting like coworkers and colleagues?
I just want to point out the layers of what Lauren has said. So in supporting like trans and gender nonconforming staff, like that is just a big thing in like having a representative staff of the youth that you serve. So yes, supporting them, but also putting in the work to ensure that youth are being represented in your staff as well. So That was like a 2 for Lauren, so I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much for that, Lauren, for being vulnerable and sharing that in this space. And that's a lot, like so much wisdom there and just self-reflection. And I think that safety is real, right? And having to make those kinds of choices all the time that are balancing like safety being seen and then what's the risk of being seen, and those things are real. And thank you for naming that. And it does like call us, charge us to really look at our internal policies and the support that we're providing for staff and volunteers and everybody. Thank you. I am so thrilled to have a friend and colleague, Luca Kai, here today, Executive Director of the St. Louis Queer Support Helpline. We've invited Luca just to share some of the amazing resources that Squish provides and their wisdom and expertise. And I want to hand it over to Luca just to share some of what they brought today.
Thank you so much, Kendon. I don't think I can screen share. Would you mind moving back? Yeah, there we go. That one. Hi, everybody. My name is Luca. I use they, them pronouns. The lens I bring to this table is as the co-founder and executive director of Squish, the St. Louis Queer Support Helpline. If you've heard of Squish before, let us know in the chat. I'm here to tell you a little bit more about what we do and how we can partner. So the lens I bring is really uplifting queer mental health and the power of peer support. The reason I started Squish in the first place is I'm a trans non-binary immigrant from Singapore, which is a small country in Southeast Asia. I moved to St. Louis in 2016 because of the queerphobia I was facing in my home country. I found a really supportive and empowering trans community in St. Louis that faces a lot of challenges, but also has a lot of powerful activism and community organizing going on. So I found that before Squish, no LGBTQ specific helplines staffed by trained peer counselors had existed in St. Louis, at least for the past 40 years. I heard that in the 1980s, there was a gay and lesbian hotline. If any of you have heard of it, let me know in the chat or other pieces of queer history. But even then, the gay and lesbian hotline was, only for gay and lesbian people, and as opposed to the full spectrum of queer and trans identities. So we started Squish because we believe that every LGBTQIA person deserves to be treated compassionately and to access the community resources they need to lead fulfilling lives. Next slide, please. We noticed there were some gaps in the local service system. So have any of you heard of the Trevor Project or the Trans Lifeline? I'm seeing some nods. So these are national LGBTQ and trans hotlines, but we believe that only a local resource like Squish will be familiar with the St. Louis context, be able to build community locally, be able to refer to culturally competent local resources and wraparound services that can holistically meet someone's needs. And unlike traditional hotlines, we believe that offering a range of emotional support services, including peer counseling, is actually really important. There's a lot of funding and resources of crisis intervention work, which is important in its own right. But what if we can do crisis prevention by allowing people to call, even if they feel like they're not on the brink of emotional breakdown? I wonder, how many of you have felt this way, but I've definitely felt like wanting to pick up the phone and say call BHR or a crisis line, but then feeling like, oh, I'm not in crisis yet, so I don't want to take up the line, or I don't want to take up time that could be going to someone else more in need. And so that is the whole philosophy behind peer support, which is people can call if you're having a bad day, or if they're having a good day, or if they want to be processing any joys or challenges with another queer person, another person, community member with a similar identity to whom you don't have to explain yourself or your own identities or common queer terminology. So our mission is to serve and strengthen the queer community in the St. Louis metro area and beyond by providing empathetic listening, connections to identity affirming resources, and education and advocacy for queer and trans needs. To do this, we run 6 programs, including our peer support helpline, Squish Book Resource Database, which is a regional database full of queer affirming and vetted resources. We run a cult data analysis and advocacy program where we collect data and advocate for systemic change on behalf of the St. Louis queer community. We provide trainings for partner organizations like this one, provide education to our own community for skill building, and engage over 60 volunteers in grassroots organizing. So I hate hearing the sound of my own voice for more than 5 minutes. So I'm gonna ask the group if I know Lauren just shared very vulnerably about their own identity and experiences working as a queer person in the system. So my next question for y'all is, I'm gonna pause on this slide. When might you connect someone to Squish's peer support helpline? What are some scenarios where you feel like this might be a helpful referral? I'm gonna drop the prompt in the chat as well. Yeah, Mary says if someone is feeling unsupported. Cole, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was just gonna say maybe a lack of community and just somewhere to go to try to find community.
Absolutely. I'm wondering if Mary, you want to elaborate on your chat response?
Sometimes just our youth just don't feel that anybody understands what they're going through or agrees with what they're going through. And for people who are allies, we don't understand what they're going through. So we may not be the best person to help them process. So having a hotline that they can call just to process some things with people who truly understand is valuable.
Yeah. Mary, I think your response just demonstrated a lot of cultural humility too, and I want to uplift that for everyone in the room. So the recognition that I might not be the best person for this youth or young person to talk to, and that's why I want them to be able to reach out to a peer who might. I think that's a great point.
I'll add, Luther, that there's this recent development of like the 988 hotline and some of the systematic challenges with those of not having the resources available to sustain that sort of like national level of call volume. So having Squish available, even if it is just like as a support or alternative to something that is more 3-button away sort of deal is beneficial because there's guaranteed resources and support here, whereas in some cases with the 988, there aren't.
That's a great point, Diamond. And I heard you mention before the importance of giving youth agency and options. And I think having multiple helplines or options that someone can reach out to contributes to that. Some people have a bad experiences with the Travis Project. Maybe then I'll refer to the Trans Lifeline. Some people have a bad experiences with the Trans Lifeline or with Squish. And so having multiple options is really helpful for people to be able to talk to different resources with different approaches to emotional support. So with that, I'm going to move on to this next slide here. What information can you share when making a referral to our helpline? So we're operational Fridays to Mondays. Next slide, please. 1 to 7 p.m. So we're intentionally open on weekend hours so we can be accessible outside of traditional business hours, especially if folks say things like, my therapist isn't available on the weekend or my psychiatrist isn't working. Having a kind of emotional support buffer over the weekend can often tide people over before they start their week. Our volunteers are highly trained, so before taking calls, all of our peer counselors go through at least 48 hours of training and evaluations on an extensive range of issues that queer callers might face, and then continue to train and refresh their skills throughout the year. It's a very robust program. I've been told it might be too rigorous and too robust. We're actually trying to tone it down a little bit so it can be more accessible, but I think that also ensures a really high level of support and service quality. Our line is confidential, so our peer counselors don't disclose any information about a caller's identity or situation, except in cases of immediate and severe danger. And even in those cases, we work collaboratively with callers to try and maximize their agency and autonomy. Next slide, please. We're open to allies as well. So I think it was Mary who mentioned that allies or supportive people who are not queer might be able to call as well. So friends, family members, and service providers are welcome to call, and that includes you. So if you're seeking information or support on how to best support queer youth, it's a great resource. Think about it as an information line as well. Or you're thinking, oh my gosh, I have a stupid question. I don't want to embarrass myself or ask the queer or trans youth I'm talking to about this, you can call Squish. And we're here, our volunteers are here to do that emotional labor to answer questions about queer or trans topics. Next slide, please. We have a single session policy. So each call is treated as a single session. Volunteers provide referrals to outside resources. So if you're looking for queer and trans specific resources as well, we can provide that. Our resources are vetted. So we work with our partner organizations like MTUG and Promo to prioritize the vetted resources that they've done the work of looking into and vetting. And then we prioritize those in our resource database. And finally, our helpline is caller-led, which means we have a philosophy that our callers are people with life experiences, opinions, and preferences that need to be honored. And so for folks who work with youth like yourselves, uplifting youth agency can be so important. And so calling the line, we want to help youth and callers feel like, you know, you're the expert of your life, you have full agency, and we really trust you to be making decisions that are best for your life. So we work through issues at the caller's pace. And finally, if you're thinking, you know, I'm not open on Fridays to Mondays, how can I make a referral? You can use our appointment system. So it's a call request service where you can schedule a Squish call by filling out our online form. And then a trained queer affirming peer counselor will either call you or the youth at your preferred time. It's a little bit like scheduling a therapy appointment or having some accountability about a follow-up call. Next slide, please. So I know I'm rounding the bend on my time here. I just want to share some opportunities that you can partner or support our work. I mentioned before the Squish Book Resource Guide, which is a regional database. I'll drop it in the chat. So please don't judge it too hard because it's still in the beta phase. But if you click the link for the Squish Book, you'll find that we are a work in progress resource database website. And eventually you all should be able to search for queer and trans affirming resources in the area by various search terms and filters. On that note, we want to invite all of you to join our focus groups to give feedback on this pilot product, and we'll compensate folks at a rate of $15 to $16 per hour. If you're interested in joining these focus groups to give us feedback on the Squish Book, especially if you're passionate about shaping the landscape of resource referrals in the area using a queer and trans community-owned lens, subscribe to our newsletter, and we'll let you know once the focus groups are launched. And then finally, you can support our work by helping us spread the word about what we do, include us in your resource list, display our flyers. That can also be kind of a sign of allyship and that you're a safe person to talk to about Squish, encourage folks to call, helping us reach underserved communities, donating, volunteering, directing practicum students, connecting us to partners, are all great ways to support us. And we would love to connect. If you're interested, I'll drop my email in the chat. Next slide, please. I think now would be a good time to stop. Kendon?
Yeah, and I recognize, Luca shared some amazing data from the Squish helpline. And so that'll be included in the slide deck that we share out. So you all will have that just as reference. So you kind of have an understanding of like who calls Squish and what are some of the needs that are identified. There's some amazing, ways to partner with Squish. And Luca, I appreciate you sharing so much. And want to make sure that folks know how to contact you. I'm going to pull up the contact sheet to you here.
Yeah.
So
Thanks,
feel
Kendon.
free. Yeah. Go ahead, Luca, if you want to share just how people can reach out at all.
Yeah. I think Kendon mentioned the slides. The slides contain specific challenges that queer youth face when trying to access shelters. So definitely recommend checking it out. And feel free to reach out to us via our website, social media, newsletter, and I also dropped my personal email in the chat. It was great to be in the space, and thank you, Kendon, for inviting me. Over to you and Diamond.
Yeah, thank you so much, Luca, for joining and everyone for joining. Thank you all. We appreciate your time. Also included in the slides that we share are a bunch of resource links to other sort of best practices and toolkits and things like that. And Benita, if you wouldn't mind dropping an evaluation in the chat as well, we would love to get your feedback on today's training. And just also know that you can reach out. So Diamond is the point of contact for RITAC, so the Runaway Homeless Youth Training Technical Assistance Center and Youth Collab. You can reach out for TA, like individually for you or your organization. And I'm also, a consultant, and I'm going to drop my email in the chat. And I am a volunteer with both Squish, and I'm a consultant with Youth Collab. So I'll drop my Squish email in the chat, actually. And Diamond, any final words before we close out?
Thank you so much to everyone, especially those who took the opportunity to really dive in and learn something new, challenge some thoughts, and just be vulnerable. I greatly appreciate your time and energy that it takes to be in a space like this, and the dedication and work that we as a community, as well as other folks who may not be represented here, have put into just working to create a better and safer environment and ideally world for the LGBTQ community, and especially trans and gender expansive views. So thank you all so much. And I am filled with gratitude for being in this space today.